If there's one thing about love, it sure can be complicated. There are often so many obstacles to finding the right person, it makes us wonder why we even bother at all. But what would life be like without love? And what were Jane Austen's beliefs about it? Like any great composer, Austen asks a timeless, universal question. How do you tell the difference between infatuation and true, lasting love? To answer this, Austen takes us on an entertaining adventure in this well-loved novel of manners. We call it this because Pride and Prejudice is a work of fiction that depicts a complex social world using detailed observations. The society Austen explores is the country gentry of Regency England, and her observations about it are laugh-out-loud funny. Austen measures her characters against the customs, rules, and standards of this tricky social realm. And when it comes to love, finding a partner, or even expressing interest in a person, there are pitfalls galore. The novel's famous opening line sets the tone for our adventure. Check out Austen's tongue-in-cheek humour as her anonymous narrator, or the person telling us the story, declares, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." Do you think young, single, rich men would agree? Austen's witty observations of Regency romance are usually saturated in irony, which is when a composer expresses her meaning with words that usually signify the opposite. That's what makes it so funny. What's universally acknowledged in Regency England is not that young, single, rich fellas want wives, but that young, single ladies want rich husbands. In fact, the hot pursuit of eligible bachelors is what drives most of the action in Pride and Prejudice. This is obvious when we meet Mrs. Bennet in Chapter 1. Her relentless fussing over her daughter's marriage prospects is peak Regency middle class, and we are here for it. But if you wanted to find true love among the country gentry, where might you begin your quest? The ball, of course. A recurring aspect of the novel's setting, or where the action takes place, is the good old-fashioned Regency ball. Cue the gowns, sumptuous food, music, and dancing. Austen emphasises how young ladies lived for this pheromone-fueled social sport. Because for a man to be fond of dancing was a certain step towards falling in love. Austen uses high modality, or highly certain and persuasive language here, to convey the prevailing attitude among young ladies. Dancing was the fast track to courtship. Is that still the case today? And is a turn on the dance floor, or even a few turns, really enough to catch true feelings? At the very least, you can get a good look at a person and make sure they don't stink. But Austen suggests that this view of love, which emphasises first impressions, is somewhat immature. In fact, First Impressions was the novel's original title. As the story progresses, Austen contrasts heady dance floor love against slow-burning epistolary love. That's when a relationship is developed gradually through letters, like the ones between Darcy and our protagonist, or main character, Elizabeth Bennet. But before their relationship takes off, Austen places a major obstacle in their way: pride. Okay, so their first meeting doesn't go so well. Darcy insults Elizabeth at the Meryton Assembly Ball, saying that she's tolerable but not handsome enough to dance with. Ouch! During a post-ball debrief at the Lucases' home, the Bennet and Lucas ladies put Darcy under the microscope. Elizabeth's bestie, Charlotte Lucas, believes Darcy has a right to be proud due to his aristocratic status and eye-watering wealth. Elizabeth agrees and says she could easily forgive his pride if he had not mortified hers. In other words, she could cope with Darcy's ego if he hadn't insulted her. Is that a fair call? Or does she place too much importance on a bad first impression? Either way, Elizabeth's dialogue or conversation with the people around her openly reveals her character flaw, pride. And since Darcy seems to have the same flaw, that's a problem. Austen uses fun dialogue throughout the novel to help us understand her characters, their motives, and the complex world they live in. This includes the inner world of their emotions. But another way Austen achieves a deeper level of insight is through free indirect discourse, which is a hallmark of her style. Free indirect discourse is a type of third-person narration that delves into the thoughts of characters. It combines the distance of third-person language, like he, she, and they, with the biased personal point of view of a first-person narrator. What it does in Pride and Prejudice is show us how perceived obstacles to love can be deceiving. Just when we think Darcy is too proud to love Elizabeth, Austen dives into his private thoughts. He starts to admire her uncommonly intelligent face, the beautiful expression of her dark eyes, and her light and pleasing figure. Austen then freely jumps to Elizabeth's perspective to reveal how she was perfectly unaware of Darcy's growing crush. Of course, this creates the most delicious dramatic irony as we watch Darcy squirm under the weight of his growing feelings for Elizabeth. Remember, dramatic irony is when the audience knows something that the characters don't. And since we know what Elizabeth doesn't, we can see how futile her pride is, how it blinds her to the truth and delays her happiness. It also makes us hang on until she finally catches Darcy's drift. Well played, Miss Austen. The beauty of Elizabeth's eyes becomes a motif or recurring symbol in the novel. They signify Darcy's recognition of her true character, which is the foundation of his love. Her inner beauty shines through her pair of fine eyes, which are brightened when Elizabeth trudges through the mud. Instead of being revolted by the state of her dress, like the snooty Bingley sisters, Darcy only sees how the exercise has made Elizabeth more beautiful. Yes, poor Darcy's got it bad. Why? Because his love stems from respect and admiration, not lust. Ironically, Elizabeth's criticisms of Darcy make him fall deeper in love with her. When Bingley asks Elizabeth to assess Darcy's character in front of a room full of people, she declares, "I am perfectly convinced that Mr. Darcy has no defect. He owns it himself without disguise." In other words, Darcy thinks he's flawless. A little banter ensues, and soon enough, Darcy begins to feel the danger of paying Elizabeth too much attention. This whole situation is deeply ironic because it's the opposite of what we expect. Instead of feeling embarrassed when Elizabeth calls him out, Darcy begins to fall dangerously in love with her. So, is Austen suggesting that we go on the attack to reel someone in? Or is it more the case that honesty and fearless banter are like a deadly love potion? While the tension simmers away between Darcy and Elizabeth, poor Charlotte Lucas has sealed her fate. She's agreed to marry the cringy Mr. Collins, not because she loves him, but because she needs security. She accepts his hand without thinking highly either of men or matrimony. The alliteration or repetition of the M sound plonks men and matrimony in the same boring category of life's necessities. Nothing romantic about that. For women of small fortune in Regency England, marriage is about survival. Love is just a lucky bonus. This may sound like an exaggeration, but sadly, it's not. Austen uses realism to depict Charlotte's situation. This is when a composer tries to truthfully represent aspects of real life without exaggeration or embellishment. In this case, it's a sobering reminder of the precarious position of women in the Regency period. But enough of the gritty realism. Let's get to Austen's exploration of the joy of love. It starts with the shattering of pride and the illumination of truth. Here we return to Darcy and Elizabeth's epistolary relationship. Austen uses letters in Pride and Prejudice as turning points in her plot. They have the power to alter people's lives and manipulate their emotions. Remember, letters were the Regency equivalent of texting. When Darcy writes to Elizabeth and reveals the ugly truth about Wickham, she gets a much-needed reality check. Up until that point, Elizabeth thought Darcy was the villain and Wickham was his victim. But Darcy's honest letter leads Elizabeth to admit she was blind, partial, prejudiced, absurd. And had she been in love with Wickham, she could not have been more wretchedly blind. Close call. The repetition of blind, where it's repeated more than once, emphasises Elizabeth's profound realisation. Of course, Elizabeth isn't actually blind, it's a metaphor for her ignorance. Remember, a metaphor is when one thing is described as something else. This is a turning point in the story, because Elizabeth's realisation helps her see Darcy in a different light, paving the way for feelings. In the novel's denouement, or resolution, after Elizabeth and Darcy finally get their act together, Elizabeth wants to know, when and how did Darcy first fall for her? Talk about putting a guy on the spot. He tells her that he cannot fix on the hour, or the spot, or the look, or the words which laid the foundation. I was in the middle before I knew that I had begun. Austen uses an analogy here to represent Darcy's love to a building. Remember, an analogy is when an author compares the current situation to a related example to better illustrate their point. Before Darcy even knew he was in love, the foundation was already laid, and he was standing in the middle of it all. So, instead of being something deliberate and contrived, like strategically selecting a dance partner, Darcy's love was gradual and beyond his control. Now that's romantic. Through Austen's depiction of different kinds of love, like shallow infatuation, partnering for security, and the slower, more meaningful kind, she helps us clarify our understanding of this timeless issue. She's not saying we should skip the ball or ignore the practicality of a match, but there's a certain foundation that lasting love needs. Call it compatibility, honesty, or mutual respect. Darcy and Elizabeth seem to have something truly special. What do you think? We hope you enjoyed this Schooling Online production. For more easy lessons, check out our other videos.